unless, of course, he does have something to hide, which is that the audio transcript would confirm the concerns Americans have. Next up is another scandal from the Biden administration. Now, Joe Biden, as you recall, and I've talked about this just the other day, was interviewed by Special Counsel Hur twice. It was like over the course of 2 days. It was 2 interviews. And that transcript of of those interviews have been released to Congress and released to the public. Judicial Watch had sued for them. All records about that interview process. And as a result of those interviews, Hur concluded that Joe Biden's memory is terrible and no jury would ever convict him for crimes that he committed. I think that's a fair analysis. And many people were outraged, including yours truly. Why on earth would someone like President Biden be allowed to get a get-out-of-jail-free card because he has a failing memory, but he's still allowed to be president of the United States? And that can't be a legitimate reason for not prosecuting him. And of course, the Biden administration was angry at her for using this as an excuse because politically it was extremely damaging to him. It's not that it wasn't true, but damaging. Of course, they would say it's not true. And one way to solve this debate, because we have seen the transcript, is to hear what he said on audio. And they have the audio tapes, and they don't want to turn them over to Judicial Watch. We had sued for them, and they were giving us the runaround. I talked about how they were stonewalling, and they didn't even want to tell us where they were going to give them to us. And finally, we pushed and pushed and pushed, and the court agreed that you got to tell Judicial Watch what you're going to do so we can move this case along. And they just told us the other day that they're not going to give us these audio tapes to protect Joe Biden's privacy. The President of the United States has a privacy interest in the sound of his voice. Do you think I have a privacy interest in the sound of my voice? And I'm just, President of Judicial Watch. He's President of the United States. The idea we're violating his privacy by hearing his voice in a federal criminal investigation, it's absurd. But these are the specific citations they use to federal law, or that allow them under court interpretations and such. FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, provides 2 exemptions, and this is from the Department of Justice's website. Provides 2 exemptions to protect personal privacy, Exemptions 6 and 7C. And there are other exemptions related to personal privacy, but those are the 2 most used ones. Exemption 6 applies to personnel, like, your HR file and medical files and similar files, when disclosure of such information, and this is the government's description, emphasis, would constitute a clearly unwarranted invasion of personal privacy. And 7C is related to criminal investigation privacy. Applies to records of information compiled for law enforcement purposes that the disclosure of which, again, could reasonably be expected to constitute an unwarranted invasion of personal privacy. So they are telling us that the voice of President Biden answering questions under oath in a criminal investigation, unprecedented in scope and nature in some ways, would be a clearly unwarranted invasion of his personal privacy. There you have the Biden administration playing lawyer for Joe Biden personally, providing him political cover, and now we're going to be fighting for months over it. So the result of them doing this, the Biden administration doing this, is to keep this tape away from you so you can't hear it during an election season. It may not even be resolved until after the election at this rate. Through this fraudulent assertion of privacy. Now, typically, when there is a privacy interest you have in personal information. Like, for instance, if Joe Biden said during the deposition, during the audio, and they said, tell us your name, address, and social security number. His home address, his social security number, they could black that out, or they could bleep that out in an audio, and they'd get no objection from Judicial Watch. We know the sorts of things that are typically protected under privacy exemptions. Social security numbers, personal email addresses, home addresses, some other detail and data, or even your identity sometimes. If you're an outsider communicating with the government, sometimes that's protected. It's expanded to include the protection of government workers' identities, which is often outrageous since they work for us. We need to know who's making decisions, but that's another matter. As I say in my comment, this is yet another brazen cover-up. The Biden Justice Department's political gambit, it is a gambit, in asserting Joe Biden's privacy concerns in order to withhold audio of his criminal interviews with the special counsel really takes the cake. Obviously, the public's right to know outweighs Joe Biden's privacy in this widely public case. And of course, Biden can simply waive any privacy so the public can fully understand why he was given a pass from criminal prosecution. So as I was beginning to say, and I made the point in my comment there, is that there is you weigh the privacy against the public's right to know. So it's a balancing test. And what the government's saying is there's no way that Joe Biden's voice and our interest in hearing him, how he comported himself in this interview and how he talked and such, that he has a privacy interest there that outweighs the public interest in figuring out whether or not he's a crook or not. And the chutzpah of this administration jumping in to protect the so-called rights of Joe Biden has they've done nothing but eviscerate the rights of President Trump, saying he had no presidential executive privilege. He had no attorney-client privileges that could be protected. All sorts of privileges typically afforded to presidents and criminal defendants, they came in and tore apart and blew up. And here there's an audio of Biden being interviewed by a special counsel of the United States for the Justice Department, and we can't hear the audio because of his privacy rights. I tell you, it reminds me of another outrageous assertion of privacy by a prior administration. I think this was the Biden administration. I mean, the George W. Bush administration. Could have been Obama. I don't remember. It doesn't matter because usually they're similarly absurd, Republican or Democrat, in sometimes these exemptions. But we had a big FOIA request on 9/11, and we got these documents, and it became readily apparent that they were blacking out Osama bin Laden's name after 9/11 from Washington Post reports. So they give us a news article under FOIA and they black out the name. And their argument was that Osama bin Laden was, even though he's a terrorist who murdered 3,000 Americans, he had a privacy interest that needed to be protected. Can you believe it? Now they backed off when we screamed bloody murder about it. Now, I'm not saying Joe Biden is like Osama bin Laden. I'm just saying that his privacy interest is very small and certainly doesn't apply to the sound of his voice. Incredible. So we're going to continue. We're going to argue this in court. We're in court with, ironically, we're on the side of CNN. CNN had separately filed a lawsuit. Now they're likely to be consolidated with Judicial Watch's lawsuit. And our friends over at the Heritage Foundation have also sued. So we're all going to be fighting for the truth together. And it shows you that when it comes to transparency in government, there are often strange bedfellows. I mean, we're often on the side of the media for transparency in government. And, you know, one thing I kind of try to remind politicians is that both Democrats and Republicans, even though they often don't, when push comes to shove, are transparent, but certainly Republicans and Democrat voters alike support transparency in government. So I think it's probably not only good policy for a government ruled of law as opposed to men, a republic, but it's good politics. I mean, who's against transparency in government? Who's going to run for president or senator or congressman saying we need to be less transparent. I'm running for mayor and I'm going to cut off public information. The American people don't have a right to know what their government's up to. So we need more transparency in government. We need politicians who not only pay lip service to it, but stand strong for it, especially in politically inconvenient circumstances like what we're saying. Now, you know, if Joe Biden were smart, because he's not going to get prosecuted. I mean, I'm outraged about him not getting prosecuted, but he's not going to get prosecuted. He'd say, I don't, release it. I don't have anything to hide. And I think he is smart, or smart enough, or people around him who are making decisions, assuming he's cognitively impaired, are smart enough to know that would be probably Fitton's right. He has nothing to hide. That would be a good political argument. Unless, of course, he does have something to hide, which is that the audio transcript would confirm the concerns Americans have about his cognitive temperament, his cognitive ability, his temperament, his memory, etc. So the battle begins once again. Simple FOIA request, just give us the darn audio of those tapes that we had congressional hearings on. Why can't we get audio? We got transcript. Give us the audio. Nope. It's now literally a federal case. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.